if a Harvard Law School professor who is a senior senator from the state that I grew up in, and I am, a very liberal, progressive guy, even though I worked on Wall Street. I am not ashamed to say I voted for Bernie Sanders in the New York primary. And if anybody, as a former journalist, if there's any guy who should be supportive of Elizabeth Warren, it would be me. But I couldn't believe the things coming out of her mouth. And then you have Bernie Sanders, of course, talking about the millionaires and the billionaires, and you have Hillary Clinton taking $675,000 from Goldman Sachs, and then as part of her $10 million cash from financial services firms for speaking out speaking to these firms, and then she's denigrating Wall Street, and you have Donald Trump denigrating Wall Street, and everybody is denigrating Wall Street, and I'm trying to think to myself, okay, something is not right here. This has gone too far, and this is my thinking of somebody who has, exposed in 3 lengthy books all sorts of bad behavior on Wall Street, in numerous articles in Vanity Fair, in numerous columns in the New York Times about Wall Street bad behavior. I have been, if you ask people on Wall Street, they probably think I've been, the most outspoken person against Wall Street that's come along in 10 years. And here I'm feeling this welling up inside of me, this feeling that I don't understand why our elected leaders and our people who are supposed to know better are completely vilifying Wall Street in every way. And I'm not naive. I understand that Wall Street is a very easy target, especially after 2008. And I began thinking about it some more, and I began, of course, realizing that there were the bailouts, and then, which of course nobody liked, even though they made a profit for the federal government, and they were exactly the thing that the Fed was designed to do in 1913 when it was created. It did exactly what it was supposed to do, and I can only imagine what our life would be like if there hadn't been the lender of last resort stepping in, and yet people didn't like the bailouts. And of course, that was compounded by the fact that there was a lot of wrongdoing on Wall Street, as I have written in my books in 2007 and 2008, and the Justice Department under Obama, for reasons that are still escape me, chose not to prosecute any of this wrongdoing, and that added to the people's negative feeling about Wall Street, because when there's a lot of wrongdoing, people, like with your children, if your children do something wrong, they need to be disciplined, they need to be told that they did something wrong so they don't repeat that behavior. Well, in this case, unlike, say, in the savings and loan crisis or even after 1929, there was no prosecution of the wrongdoing on Wall Street. And it got to the point where I wrote in House of Cards, I had all of these documents that I had uncovered about the wrongdoing that had occurred at the Bear Stearns hedge fund, and knowingly doing things that were wrong, or doing things that they hadn't told their investors they were going to do, and those 2 guys cost their investors $1.5 billion, and they're big boys, nobody's going to cry for them. But then they were prosecuted by the Eastern District of New York, and they were found to be not guilty, and the jurors came out of that after that verdict and said actually they wished that they had these guys to manage their money. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? So after that failed prosecution, the Justice Department, pursuing this Holder Doctrine, which basically, after Arthur Andersen, made the Justice Department very nervous about prosecuting any corporate wrongdoing for fear that these firms would go the way of Arthur Andersen, they chose not to prosecute anybody. And I think that was a bad mistake, and that added to the vilification, the hatred people had of Wall Street, because when people do something wrong, they should get held to account for it. And so into this vacuum came the populist politicians and regulators who decided that they were going to be the ones to hold Wall Street accountable. They were going to be the ones to blame Wall Street. And essentially, what happened, unfortunately, with the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010 and the accompanying Volcker Rule, and then through a guy who, of course, has just left the Fed, Dan Tarullo. Dan Tarullo took it upon himself to become the chief sheriff of Wall Street, and a responsibility that had been handled by the New York Fed, and after 2008, that responsibility moved to Washington in the face of Dan Tarullo, and Dan Tarullo took it upon himself to make sure that that what happened in 2008, i.e., Wall Street's role in exacerbating the financial crisis, would never happen again. And so what he essentially did was he threw sand into the gears of what I call the beautiful machine that is Wall Street. And so I found myself at a loss to explain all of these things that were happening, and felt that I needed to unburden myself. So I stopped writing my book about five friends. I last summer and fall wrote this book called Why Wall Street Matters, and it's a very strange feeling. This must be how Nixon felt when he went to China, is to be the guy who has sort of been someone who pulled back the curtain on Wall Street bad behavior for years and years and years, and now I'm coming to Wall Street's defense. And I do just want to say that I've had a lot of time to think about what Wall Street does, what it does right, what it does wrong, and my view is that it does a lot of things right that need to be preserved and to be celebrated, and it does things wrong that need to be corrected. So instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which seems to be was the thinking between 2008 and November 8th of 2016, I think we need to be smart about the way we think about Wall Street, the way we regulate Wall Street, the way we talk about Wall Street, because the truth is that nobody would want to live in a world without Wall Street being able to do what it does. And before I open it up to your questions, I just want to say that Wall Street is a bit of a miracle. What happens on Wall Street every day, and yeah, you need to step back and think about the miracle that occurs. This idea of what we economists refer to as fractional banking, where all of us collectively take our hard-earned wages, our money, our cash, and we put it into a bank. Why do you think commercial banks look the way they do? They look the way they do because, you can go into the old City Group Bank across the street, and you go in, and then there's this incredibly huge atrium with barrel vaults, and it looks incredibly stolid. And the idea is to make you think that this is the safest place in the world. And of course, that's the way we feel about our banks. It's a very personal relationship we have, and understandably so. They have our money, and we expect to get it back when we want it. And this is the miracle that occurs every day without us even thinking about it. We put our money in the bank, and it's not really there. Our money is not in the bank. In fact, if it were in the bank, the banking system wouldn't work. Capitalism wouldn't work. It's not in the bank. It's never been in the bank because it's been taken by the bankers, these interstitial men, as Ralph Nader once referred to what happens on Wall Street. The interstitial men and women, not enough women, by the way. If there had been more women on Wall Street, we wouldn't have had what happens in 2008 and what happens periodically, but that's another subject. But they take our money. The first thing they do is they pay you a pittance for it. Right? If you look at your checking account or your savings account, the amount of interest that you get on your savings, your money, is so absurdly low as to be basically zero. I don't know if you've looked at it lately, but do yourself a favor and look at it. It's basically zero. So you're giving them your money, we're giving them our money for free. This is the miracle that occurs every day. We're giving them our money for free. They then take that money and they lend it out. So we're collectively, I think JP Morgan has $2.5 trillion of deposits. So we're collectively giving our money for free to JP Morgan every day. $2.5 trillion. They take that money and they lend it out to small businesses, medium-sized businesses, big businesses all across the country and the world. And of course, they make a profit on that spread between what they take it from us at, which is zero, so they're getting free money. What other business on the face of the earth doesn't have to pay for its cost of goods sold? There isn't one. GM has to pay for rubber and glass and plexiglass and leather and all the other things and radios and all that stuff that they have in their cars. JP Morgan doesn't have to pay anything for its raw material. At this particular moment, thanks to the Fed, because of quantitative easing 1, 2, and 3, and the way that the Fed has kept interest rates so low, this is a huge bonanza for the big banks because they don't pay anything for their raw material. They then turn around and lend that money out, and they capture that spread. And that is the magic of capitalism. That is the magic that occurs every day with people not even thinking about it. And that money goes to Google or Microsoft or small businesses that you've never heard of. And as a result, they take that money, they invest in new plant and equipment, they hire more people, they pay them higher wages, we hope, and creates wealth all over the world. It creates things like this device, this iPhone that we have in our pockets that is a miracle in itself. This could not be possible without Wall Street. Nor could shelves filled with food and we go to the supermarket, which we take for granted. Basically nothing that we have in our world today that we value, that we don't even think twice about, would be possible without Wall Street. And the miracle that occurs every day is that we trust these banks to have our money when we want it. And when does it break down? It breaks down when we lose that faith. And that happened in 1929. People got scared. And by the way, that wasn't the first time that it happened. It happened lots of times. There have been bank crises for years. We forget about all of them. But obviously there were lines around banks in 1929 because people were afraid that their money wasn't going to be there. And of course, when enough people get afraid that their money's not going to be there, guess what? They're right. Their money isn't going to be there because it was never there. It was never there to begin with. And the same thing happened in 2008. People don't think about it that way, but the exact same thing happened on 2008. 2008 was a run on the bank. Not by you and I. Why not? Because the FDIC was created in 1934 or whatever it was, and nowadays each bank account that you have is guaranteed up to $250,000. And that's usually enough for most people, not David Rubenstein, but it's enough for most people. And so you and I didn't panic in 2008. There were no bank lines in 2008 because none of us were worried about our losing more than $250,000. You can have more than one account, by the way, so you can have that insurance more than one time. But what did happen in 2008 is the institutional investors, the people who had much more than $250,000 at stake, they got scared, very scared. And it was an institutional run on the bank. So as I described in House of Cards, I could have written the same thing about Lehman Brothers or Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley, and almost probably the same thing about Goldman Sachs. Is what was happening was that a place like Bear Stearns was making a mint off underwriting mortgage-backed securities, taking mortgages that probably should never have been written and packaging them up as securities and selling them off as investments all around the world. And they were paying the rating agencies to say they were AAA, and they were selling those things off, and they were taking a fee. So it was one of the great innovations of the 1980s was this securitization, thanks to Lou Ranieri at Salomon Brothers, and we had what became mortgage-backed securities. And that worked beautifully, and Bear Stearns was making a mint, and so was every other firm on Wall Street, making a mint off of selling these securities. And then what happened is that the music stopped, that the mortgages inside them were so terrible and should never have been written in the first place, and they stopped being paid back, and so the mortgages-backed securities started to default. and the Wall Street firms like Bear Stearns couldn't sell them anymore. So they had more and more of these mortgage-backed securities collecting on their asset side of their balance sheet. And they had leverage of 50-1. And they were using these securities, these mortgage-backed securities, as collateral for their overnight financing that they got from Fidelity and Federated. And, you know, Bear Stearns had $18 billion of cash on their balance sheet when they failed. But they needed $70 billion a day to run their business. The delta between 70 and 18 came from their overnight financing, their short-term repo financing. Well, what happened in March of 2008 is these institutional lenders decided that there should be a run on the bank. They no longer believed that Bear Stearns was going to pay back this money that they owed them on a daily basis. So they just stopped providing it. And so Bear Stearns ran out of cash. They could not literally finance their business, even though they had plenty of money, and they had $12 billion in equity, and their stock had been trading at $175 a share a year and a quarter earlier. So the exact same thing happened in 2008 as happened in 1929, and it happened in years previously to that. So the miracle that occurs here every day is the faith that we have in this system. And when we lose that faith, bad things happen. So my fear, and why I wanted to write this book, is because I think we collectively as a nation don't understand Wall Street, we don't understand finance, and I understand that. I don't understand how a car engine works either, and I can drive my car without knowing how a car engine works. And I can go to the ATM. I happen to know a lot about how Wall Street works, but most people, they can go to the ATM machine, get their cash, even though it's not there, and don't have to know how Wall Street works. But I felt that people needed to know how something as important as Wall Street works. And I felt it was my duty to write this book, even though people may not want to know or care about why Wall Street works, or let alone hear about from somebody like me. But between politicians denigrating Wall Street, between people not understanding it, I thought the time was right to write this book. And I hope that people take the time, and it's short, it's not like my other books, it's short, it's an easy read, and I thought it would be just enough to let people be able to say to one another without embarrassment, this is how Wall Street works, and I want to be part of a fact-based debate about whether we should take a sledgehammer to Dodd-Frank or we should take a scalpel to Dodd-Frank. And that's where we are now. We're at this incredibly important moment in the financial history of this country, where we're about, unfortunately, with the Dow at 21,000 and Donald Trump, the deal maker in chief, about to take a sledgehammer to our financial regulation, when people like Elizabeth Warren, who should know better, don't know better. We're at a very precarious moment, and I was hoping that this book would help that debate and make that debate possible for more people to participate in. And I will tell you one other thing before I stop and take your questions is, like everybody, I wrote this book with the thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and that she was going to continue the vilification of Wall Street that she had engaged in during the campaign, and that was de rigueur under the Obama administration. And obviously she lost and Donald Trump won. And even though he trashed Wall Street on a regular basis, in large part because Wall Street wanted to have nothing to do with Donald Trump, because his companies had gone into bankruptcy 4 times, and it does not take Wall Street bankers 4 times to realize that this guy was perhaps the worst credit in the world. He surrounds himself now with Goldman Sachs guys. So go figure. I think it's a book that's as relevant now as ever, but it's hard to break through. It's hard to be a writer in this time when, if it's not about Donald Trump, people just really don't seem to be that interested. But thank you for inviting me here. I feel like I've made my pilgrimage to Mecca. Most people would never expect I'd be standing here and having this conversation, but thank you, David, for having the courage to invite me, and I appreciate all of you coming. I've been to places where no one has shown up, so I really appreciate that you all are here, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
you.